Ah, welcome to the first of the paint drying series. So cool because watching paint dry would be more interesting. So yeah, the reason why I'm doing these is because if you didn't see the last video, I need to upload more content. Well, I need to create more content, otherwise I'm not practicing video editing. So what I decided to do is to sort of track some of the lesser interesting projects that I do, and specifically ones where I kind of only do a little bit on them a day. And yeah, so maybe day by day, or you know, every few days or whatever it is, I'll do a little bit, and I'll post a very short video of that. This is the intro to the first one of those, and what it's about really isn't that interesting or important. We're going to be looking at creating a database to track e-liquid ingredients. Yep, because I used to smoke. Now I don't smoke, but I vape, which is at least better. Due to the extreme expense of pre-made liquids, I make my own. I'm not going to be doing a video on that right now. What I do need to do, and this might sound trivial if you've never done it, but it's actually quite it's quite a task to keep track of what ingredients you got and how much of each ingredient you got, because you can end up with multiple bottles of the same ingredient and it starts to get a bit of a pain. So what I did a while back was I created a spreadsheet which kind of evolved a little bit, but I'll show you that in a second. But it just doesn't work, you'll see that. And so for quite a long time, in fact for a very long time, I've been meaning to create a database which would be a lot quicker and a lot nicer to use. And yeah, quite honestly, I just can't really get the motivation to sit down and the time to sort of just get it done. So I'm just going to do a little bit a day, and if you like, you can follow along. So without further ado, what we're going to do is have a quick look at the Excel spreadsheet that I have been using and what the database will replace, so you can get an idea of what it needs to do and why I need to move up to something else. So let's have a look at that. So here's how the sort of spreadsheet started off, I think, as I remember, if I remember correctly. Basically it was just a way to track ingredients that I bought. So just put the date in that I bought them, sort of a link to where I got them from, so I could quickly go back and reorder. Obviously the name of the item, a volume of how much I bought, a weight, which I never really bothered with, and then just a unique ID for each order I made. So that basically I could create this ID here, which was a unique ID for that particular ingredient bottle, so that I could track per bottle and not just per ingredient, because obviously the volume is reliant on you knowing how much is in each bottle. I also then decided to add in the price that I paid for the quantity, and then obviously by calculating how much I paid for it and how much I got, I could work out a price per unit, i.e. how much it is per mil. And then I decided to add in the approximate volume for 1 mil produced, i.e. how much of this particular ingredient you were going to use on average, or as a guesstimate, for producing 1 mil of e-liquid. And therefore I could work out how much actual e-liquid, in theory, I could make from that bottle. These ones pretty useless, never really did anything with them. And then I did a note. So I basically just filled this out for every purchase that I made, and so I had like a control of all the purchases I'd made, how much they cost and how much actual ingredients I had. The idea being is that when you use a bit, you sort of you know, you could subtract that from the volume bought and you would have a sort of track of what you've done. So the next kind of sheet that I created was this one, which kind of contains recipes, and here we have a well-known DIY recipe rhodonite. And so I'd basically have one of these blocks which goes from here down to here for each mix that I would make. And quite obviously it would have the name of what, you know, whatever the recipe was, a kind of serial number, the date I did it, how much, the PG/VG mix, and also put in, because at one point I was having to sort of dilute the VG a bit back when atomizers couldn't really deal with very high VG. Don't do that anymore. The actual concentrate of the nic, so 7.2% nicotine, what my target nicotine was for the mix, and then the percentages of any flavors in there. And then on this side, these are all kind of Excel formulas to figure out what the milliliters of each required are to hit these percentages. Yeah, don't need to go into that. And then down here is where it would reference what, so flavor 1, let's say, is 2%. Now down here is what flavor 1 is here. And in order for this to work, it needs to reference the exact unique ID of that bottle of that ingredient. So that's why it's got the 14 at the end. So basically, yeah, they are now all references to specific ingredient bottles. And then it gives you the milliliters again, the actual percentage. None of this is really required. It's more whilst I was developing it, so I could check my calculations were right. And then finally on the left hand side, what I really need is the weight in grams, because I mix by weight. I chucked in some other things like other expenses, so I could actually track the cost of the mix. None of this I really hardly ever use, to be honest. The bottom line is it's a lot cheaper than buying pre-made liquids, but I guess I found that out quite a few years ago. It then gives me a total weight of what this actual mix should weigh, i.e. the fluid, the liquid itself. And then before I start mixing, I weigh the empty bottle. I then weigh it again when it's full, and the difference between those should match fairly closely to that, and it kind of lets me know within, you know, a fairly tight tolerance whether I've put the right stuff in and the right amount of stuff. I then have some boxes down here which I hardly ever use these days unless I am you know, mixing something up or trying out making a recipe, adjusting and all that kind of stuff for notes at different steeping points. This here, it tells me what colour my little sticky labels on the bottle are, and then some general notes at the bottom. So that's how I've been doing it. And then to create a new one, I would just copy and paste this, and for the most part it ain't too bad. I need to, you know, probably if I'll find the same recipe and I'll just need to update that. The point here is that there's lots of updating to do. Not sure if that's today, and let's say we're going to do 100 and we're going to do it at 75, and it also automatically works out the PG is 25. Leave everything else the same. It does all the calculations. It gives me the weights. That bit's fine. But as you can see, the reference to the actual ingredients, because they are relative links, have all gone a bit all over the shop. So I then need to go back to the previous recipe and say, okay, well, I was using 7.2% Nick. So let's change this equals, and then I need to go over and find my latest nick. So I basically work backwards through it, and so that's the latest nick. It's got something in it, so I link to that, and then I'll go through all those and basically make sure they're all the same as this, except I might have to change the actual bottle ID at the end here if that one is now run out or I decide to use a different one. So kind of a bit of a pain in the butt to do that, because you just have to keep going through this list, finding it, check it's full. So then what I did, and I did this fairly early on, is I created, let's unhide it a minute. I created a macro which runs when you click this button, which basically looks through every single ingredient on here. It then looks up in this complete column here of all the ingredient names, yeah, that's all of them, tries to see if it can find that ID within this column. When it does, like it would do here, it's going to take the amount used in this mix of that, and it's going to add it to this running total here. So we now know that we've used 131.42 milliliters of that particular bottle. And then, you know, it's simple math to figure out that if you had 250 bought and you've used 131, you've got 118.58 left. And then it can easily work out the percentage of what's left as well. The last column here is a kind of a manual override to say that it's empty, because as you can see here, we've got cases where we've used more than we bought, which sounds a bit weird.
But yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that. It could be sort of minor calculation issues, or more than likely there was slightly more than 10 ml in that bottle. That's why I've used 11, and actually there's still a little bit left, which is why I haven't flagged it as empty. So by clicking this button here, it basically goes through all of the actual unique bottle IDs in this list, and it then goes through all of the mixes here, adds all that up, and does that work for me. So let's try and find that VG10 again. There it is. So yeah, that's actually gone down because I've removed a load of recipes just to make this a bit simpler. And then when I really decide it's empty, like this one here, I can put in empty here. And if we run it again, let's highlight this row so we can find it easily. When I run it again, and it takes a while because of the way I did the macro. Not the most efficient way. Let's go and find that row. Oh, there you go, there it is, there's some blue there. So yeah, and it also looks through this column, it finds out anything that's empty, it just sets them all to empty and sets that line to grey so I can more easily see what is actually gone. The yellow highlighting is just when it gets less than 50%, I think, something like that, and red is when it's at 0 or less. So then, yeah, as time went on, I decided, well, actually, this is really difficult because I can't really see very easily actually how much of an ingredient. So, for example, I just used up all of the, what was it? Bavarian Cream 11, but do I have any other bottles of Bavarian Cream and how much is in them? And, you know, I have to look through each one. So I then created this macro, which basically goes through this list and it finds an actual ingredient, a unique ingredient. So for example, in that case, it would be TPA Bavarian Cream. And then it looks through any instances in the actual unique bottles to see if there's any there. And yeah, it basically puts in here. And I have allowed for 4 separate bottles of the same ingredient. And it just looks up how much is in each of those bottles and gives me a grand total, which kind of helps out a lot. And in the case of, well, then we need to look there, Bavarian creams. So although I used up one of them, I still actually have 28 ml of that left, and it was taking ages to try and find that in this list. So that is why, and yeah, I'm making this database, is because this is just quite complicated to use. It takes ages, and when I need to order new bottles, or I know I want to make a mix, I need to look through here to see if I've got that ingredient, how much I've got, and it's just really rubbish. So that is why I'm making the database, and that's what we'll look at next.
Watching paint dry would be more interesting.